Good afternoon, everyone. It's a few minutes after, so why don't we get started and folks can join us. Welcome, everyone, to the Program and Grants Committee meeting of the Maine Recovery Council on April the 1st. And why don't we start by doing introductions? And I'm going to start with you, Paul.
I'm Paul Vinsel, member of the Maine Recovery Council. I'm an addiction medicine physician working with Spurwink and family medicine residency at Central Maine Medical Center.
Great. Gordon.
Gordon Smith, I'm the state's director of opioid response in Governor Mills' office. I'm one of her two appointments to the council.
Great. Tess.
Tess Parks. I'm the policy director for Maine Recovery Action Project, and I'm a person with lived experience.
Great. Pat.
Good afternoon. My name is Pat Kimball. I'm a recovery advocate, and I am the current chair for the Maine Recovery Council. Welcome.
Thank you, Pat. Mary.
Hi, good afternoon, all. I'm Mary Coyne, and I'm the director of the Maine Recovery Council.
Elizabeth.
Hi, I am Elizabeth Fortier, and I am the coordinator for the Maine Recovery Council.
Great. Amber.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Amber Pulsfer. I am an individual in long-term recovery, and I am also a clinician that works in MAT.
Great. Liz.
Hi, Liz Blackwell-Moore. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Director of Public Health for Cumberland County Public Health.
Great. Chastity.
Everyone, Chastity Toole. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a harm reduction consultant in rural Maine.
Great. Grayson. If he's available, maybe not. And my name is Joe Everett, and I'm the chair of this committee, and my day job is at the Opportunity Alliance here in South Portland, and I'm a member of the council. So let's dive right into our meeting. Last meeting, we covered a lot of ground. So today, I think our goal is we're going to maybe Mary talk about, I know the governance committee or Paul talked about the job description for the ED position. Maybe wrap that up. I think we want to talk about contracts. Last month, we talked some about future funding ideas. And Mary, anything am I missing for today's agenda?
No, that's all.
So I think I'll try to recap last month's or last week's. It seems like a long time ago
Yeah,
because I've literally not been at my desk since I saw you all last. It's insanity right now. So last time we spent a fair amount of time talking about the ED job description. And thank you to all the fine contributions. And thank you to Maggie, who's not here, who took a stab at sort of a draft. I know that went to the governance committee, and we look forward to hearing more about that. From there, we dove into sort of a conversation about future funding ideas. And Pat, now that you're back, I don't know if we want to revisit this. Thank you, Liz and Gordon and others. We talked a little bit about the school funding and programming for youth. That led to a conversation about just the amount of money we have available. And honestly, I have not had a chance to reach out to Ben because I've been out straight. And I know Todd was attending that meeting, but I will do that to get a regular cadence with the finance committee. And if people have any updates on that, we could hear from those folks. We then kind of moved into a conversation about, as we think about future funding ideas, talking about strategic planning and the use of a consultant. I think we then ended a little bit talking about contracts. Elizabeth was here. Thank you, Elizabeth. And I think that pretty much was a wrap, and we ended early. So that's what happened at last month's meeting. So Mary, maybe I'll just turn it over to you. I don't know how we want to order it today, because I know you guys have been doing a lot of work on contracts. So take it away and we can fill in the pieces as you see fit.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Paul, I'll put you on the spot for a second, to provide a brief overview or recap of the governance meeting, specifically our discussion around the job description, because I think that was a really helpful discussion for us to understand, we really have two different pathways we can go down moving forward and two different job descriptions that align well with each of those paths. So Paul, if you can just give a brief overview, that'll help provide some context, and then we can get into the weeds with reviewing each of those job descriptions.
Certainly, Mary. Thank you very much. I have to say, I feel like we didn't accomplish what I was hoping in that We didn't have a lot of discussion about the executive director job description. What we talked mostly about was the two different pathways that we see possible for the Maine Recovery Council over the next year as far as um, how to do our work. And one of those pathways was we continue doing what we're doing now, where we do the grant applications in-house. We make the decisions and do the contracts and everything in-house. And it was felt that if we do that, we were going to have to hire a staff of at least 5 people to do that efficiently. The second choice was to partner with an organization that already has experience doing this, and use their expertise and allow them to do the grant applications and the awarding of contracts and the contracts writing, and then the monitoring and evaluation afterwards. We didn't really we felt that each of those would require a different set of expertise on the executive director's part. And so we felt that the contract should depend on which one of those we choose to go with. And that was a question. We didn't come up with a recommendation for the MRC, but that's something we plan to discuss at the next MRC meeting next week. And Maggie did present a draft for a executive director contract, and Mary submitted the one that we have now. We did not have a chance to go through both of those to make any changes or discuss them. Did I get that right, Mary?
Yes, thank you. So the primary difference is, you are aware between the two proposed job descriptions is that one, really would support us if we want to keep our grant making in-house. If we do move forward with that job description, and if we work on edits to that one together today, it's my belief that whoever, was able to fill that position would also be able to manage the work of the council if we do decide down the road to partner with organizations for our grant making instead of managing it all in-house. And after the governance committee met, it felt pretty clear to me that, at this point we need to have more discussions around strategic planning and what our future funding opportunities look like. And that at this point, we want to be able to set ourselves up for success such that whatever decision we do make, we have capacity on the staff to help execute those decisions and make sure the work of the council is completed. So with that, my recommendation would be that we look now at the draft version that Maggie had sent around and workshop some of that language using the original job description along with the resources that Elizabeth had shared, and that we can do that together for 15-ish minutes. And then what Elizabeth and I can do is take that back and make final tweaks. The focus and intention of this meeting really being to just capture the essence of what we want included in that job description. And then again, we can workshop the details offline.
May I just interject really quickly and just say Melissa Hackett's trying to be promoted in the webinar? Thank you.
Thank you. I just got her.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Pat, sorry.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add to that is that the hope that Mary has is that the job description get approved at the next full council meeting this April. so that we can move forward to place the ads and start moving forward with the timeline. So I just want to be able to say that there's sort of a time crunch. We don't have 2 months to hash over this. We're trying to do a smooth transition from Mary to the next job description. So, I mean, the ideal is that we be able to have an approved job description at the April meeting so that we can move forward to hire the next executive director.
Yes. Thank you, Pat.
So sorry I missed the meeting, Paul and others. So Mary, I'm sorry I kind of missed this. So Paul laid out sort of two pathways. What are you suggesting we do today with with the job description?
So my suggestion is that we look at the job description Maggie had sent around and which we reviewed together at the governance committee meeting, because that job description requires a level of experience and a skill set that I think at this point would well support the council no matter how we move forward with our grant making processes and planning. And I'd rather us have that person on board now and be able to adjust the expectations later on than feel like we don't have the staffing support or expertise to not move forward with the work that we intend to do over the next couple months.
Perfect.
And that way too, we don't, spend the time reviewing a job description that ultimately we won't be using. So I think we should start with that one. And Elizabeth, if you don't mind pulling that up, that would be great. Elizabeth is going to screen share and then make notes as we chat through each of the sections. And again, just trying to capture key skills, experiences, qualifications, and then we'll work to finalize the language before the next council meeting.
Can you all see this? Perfect. Okay.
Yes, thank you. So I believe, and Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, that the text that's in green, that was developed from the original job description. So that's all consistent between the two. And then you can see where Maggie's added some additional suggested language as well. So we can start, and Joe, I can try to facilitate this, or if you want to.
You go right ahead, Mary. No, I think you have a better grasp of because I was not at the meeting or Paul or Pat.
Great. With looking at the strategy and communication section first, everyone can take a second to read it. And then if you have any thoughts or feedback about the suggested edits that Maggie's included, let's start there. Because I think what's in green, I'm comfortable and would recommend we keep in the description. And just look at, again, these suggested edits. I will say that, I do think it's important that we highlight the communications role that the executive director plays, especially, as we move forward in our work, ensuring that someone with some sort of media training or at least experience, is able to support us. And I think that translates not only to, PR situations, but also just the day-to-day communications. Having that skill set, I think, would serve this person very well. In terms of the other suggestion and proactively identifying gaps and weaknesses, I think this is a great suggestion. Something that, at least from my perspective, we would want somebody who can identify those gaps and do so proactively and also in the moment when we're engaging in processes. I do think, with the work that Sarah's doing, we will be able to have sort of an assessment of this past grant process, which will identify those gaps and weaknesses. And that may be something that on a case-by-case basis, we contract that work out. So I don't know if it's a top priority for this position, but something to keep in mind. Potentially we could translate that to a skill set or qualifications, as someone who's able to, again, proactively identify gaps, and provide a plan of action. Paul.
I'm thinking, Mary, that identifying gaps and weaknesses would pretty much require that the person have a decent amount of experience in the substance use disorder sphere, or in that, as well as some management experience.
Yes, agreed. And potentially that, again, could be captured in the skills and qualifications section, having that experience in the fields and also having managerial experience as well. Pat.
That is down in the skills section, Paul. There's prior experience in relevant areas, potential nonprofit foundation management with substance use communities within Maine. So
Okay,
that
great.
that is there.
Great. So potentially then, to avoid redundancy, my recommendation would be that we omit that line that was suggested and include the communications skill. Yeah, that Maggie mentioned. So we keep that one in, and then the proactively identifying gaps, we take that out of this section and recognize that it will be included down below. Is the committee comfortable moving forward with that change? Okay.
Sorry, so you want to remove this?
Yes. Yep. Thank you. Great. Move to the next section. While you all are reviewing that, I'll just speak and provide my perspective on this. I think developing operational strategies and procedures, that to me is one of the sort of most important roles of this position, and something that, especially as we begin to look towards developing our own grant processes and managing more of that in-house, having someone with that operations experience and skill set, I think is really important to this role. And similarly, I think coordinating with internal and external stakeholders is not a unique qualification of this role, but something that is very important, and especially the developing collaborative processes, knowing that there are many stakeholders we work with, somebody who is able to balance different perspectives and help facilitate conversations to develop strategies that work, across a diverse group of stakeholders is certainly important. And then, again, in terms of the grant management side, preparing, sending, and tracking award letters, grant agreements, related documents, that's all something that will be led by the ED, with the support of the coordinator as well, but ensuring that somebody has a pretty solid understanding of what those processes looks like, and a sense of what information to include, in all follow-up communications related to funding processes and otherwise, is certainly important. I also think, the recommendation here to have the skill set of developing and managing a team is important. I don't know if it's elsewhere, but certainly, the ED will have to provide leadership to other staff positions on the council, what we currently have, and then what also we may have in the future. I will just note, something that is unique to this council, amongst other things, is we're all consultants. And so it can be a challenge, to manage additional folks who are doing the same work when you're not all technically on the same staff and project based. So I just want to call that out as something for us to keep in mind as we move forward, that while certainly having managerial experience is important, the council is unique and it may not translate perfectly at first, and may take some getting used to, and just balancing all the different roles and the hats that somebody wears doing this job. Any thoughts or feedback on this section? Paul?
I like this, and I like that last line, because even if we partner with another organization with experience in this, I think it would be important that the ED be able to help manage that team and work with them. So no matter which way we go, I think this is important to be in there.
Great. Thank you. With that feedback, then we can incorporate the language as it's drafted here, if the committee is comfortable moving forward without any changes. All right. Hearing nothing, we'll move on to the next, grantee monitoring. Gives folks a second to review that. I agree with the suggestion Maggie has here to potentially move that first line up to the above section around communication. I think that probably fits better into that first category. I will just emphasize the importance of the skills that are mentioned here. Again, this really is an operations position, and so somebody who can establish systems for grant processes from early development of a grant to reporting requirements, monitoring and oversight and evaluation is something that would be key to success in this role. Again, not necessarily asking one person to oversee all those processes, but having a solid understanding of them to provide leadership and advice to the council about what support is needed, I think is vital to this description and this role. I think the troubleshooting grantee issues, providing technical assistance, that kind of thing is important, and knowledge of that is important. I do see that right now as more of the coordinator's role, or potentially an additional staff person who's providing grant management specifically, and they're just managing grant programming. I do think if we do things in-house, we'll need additional staff to do that. And so certainly something that an ED would need experience with, but I wouldn't necessarily say as a part of the day-to-day job description for this person.
Yeah, Mary, I'm kind of stuck there. I mean, I think this is like a development thing. This is not, it's written to sound, I think it sounds like you're going to be monitoring. And I think that's impossible. That is not the job of the ED. So I don't know. And I get the word grant monitoring is consistent with the other titles, but it's really more about the development of a system. Correct?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And I would recommend changing that section, to something like you just suggested, Joe, of program development, or operations development, systems development, something along those lines. Because I do think it's important that, this reflects something greater than just grant monitoring. Again, acknowledging that if we do oversee grants in-house again, we'll need more staff to help with that, whose job will be specific to a grant program. But what this ED is doing is really developing processes and systems across the full workload of the council, and having to do that again with various stakeholders and managing council members, community members, as well as the AG's office and other folks who are deeply involved in our processes. Along those lines, I think a couple bullets down, the working with the AG's office. I think we could sort of generalize this a little bit more to talk about establishing risk management systems, for general compliance and due diligence. Again, the processing, tracking, and reporting on grant payments and all of that is something that would involve at least more than just the ED, but having someone who can take leadership in overseeing and developing those processes, I think is what we're really trying to get at here. Bruce. Oh. Second. Do we have Bruce back as a panelist?
Sorry, I was just trying to get on as a panelist. Thank you.
No worries. I couldn't see the icon in the top, so I was confused. But welcome back. I also just want to note, I guess I have a similar feedback for the next section here, working with the Finance Committee to maintain and provide data. Our budget and our cash flow and understanding what comes in the door and what goes out the door, deeply involves partnership with the Attorney General's office, as well as the Finance Committee and the Finance Chair. So I think if we have this section again to be a little bit broader and say to maintain or budget data and financial information management of that for the council would be important. Acknowledging that that's not something the ED would have full control over, but would have to be working with our partners in providing that information on as timely of a basis as we can. Again, that's something that I think is unique about the council, is that we don't have access to all the information that, let's say, other foundations or nonprofits would, and then ED could generate information about sort of at a moment's notice. That is, again, one of those processes and more system-oriented procedures that we'll have to establish and understand, but that we don't have full control over ourselves. Great. Any other thoughts, comments? Great. All right. My recommendation again would be that we take out that troubleshooting grantee issues, and then keeping everything else essentially the same with some tweaks to the language to make it more broad around systems and processes development. And we'll change this category to not be specific to grantee monitoring.
And did you want that top one to go up in the section before?
Yes, please. And Elizabeth, we can rework that a little bit again to apply to grantees, but also be broader, because this role involves managing communications with all sorts of folks, grantees and not. And so we want to make sure that's included as well. Great. All right, if we can move down to the skills. Fantastic. So as some of you will recall, one of the changes that we discussed, I believe at the last Program and Grants Committee meeting and then also at the Governance Committee meeting was the level of experience that the ED would ideally have in the roles that we've already described and talked about. I believe at one point we were talking about 10 plus years of grant management. As you can see, this draft includes 5+ years. I'm curious to hear the thoughts of the committee on this matter specifically. I know that again was really the one section that we had further discussions around. I think the rest of these skills and qualifications are right on par, and they do a great job of encompassing everything that we would really be looking for in an ideal candidate, and also helps to capture sort of the full range of the job and responsibilities.
I really like the 5-year, Mary, because I think it doesn't tie the council's hands. Obviously, if someone has a lot of experience, but I know from experience at TOA that we used to tie our hands, and now we're a little more flexible, knowing we're going to hire the best candidate. So I like that change.
Okay.
I would
Yeah,
plug.
yeah, I
Sorry,
agree
Pat.
with Joe. I agree with Joe. 10 years is really limiting your candidate pool, I think. And we took a real chance on Mary, and that worked out real well for us. So I think that, having 5, that gives us some flexibility, but 10, I think, really ties our hands.
Yeah, Paul.
I didn't think we were taking a chance on Mary. I'm wondering about the last thing, prior experience in relevant areas is beneficial. Should we be more strong? Should we require some past experience working with SUD community? Or would that tie our hands too much?
I'll weigh in quickly and say, Paul, I think that's a great question and one that, I would encourage committee members to weigh in on. I think based on what we've discussed so far, there's general consensus about what the role involves and what we're looking for. And I do think there's a world in which we could see a number of qualified candidates who, have operation and program management experience and check all of our boxes, but have never done this work in this field, or have any real awareness or acknowledgement of DD and OUD and what it's like to have used or used drugs or love someone who uses drugs. And from my experience, at least, I think my commitment to this work in general in this field has been motivating and also allowed me to understand things to an extent that I may not have been able to, and focus on the processes versus the content matter in some ways. But I do think, again, I think the committee should weigh in because this is maybe something we don't want to necessarily require because we have the experience and the subject matter expertise on the council already, and potentially the staff doesn't need to have that same level of awareness.
So I'm going to say something pretty selfish, but I sort of really want them to have some experience in substance use disorders, at least to some degree. I think that in order to, there's a certain learning curve that we don't have the time to really put them through. And I think not that they have to have been a clinician or that. I just think the knowledge base of particularly around nonprofit substance abuse agencies work, that helps in dealing with the contracted agencies, with understanding how the grants are going to go out. I mean, selfishly, I want that person to have some experience with SUD. Could I be swayed another way? Sure, I could, because you can teach people. People are, and hopefully the person we'd hire is someone, wants to learn. But for me, I just think it's important that they have some sort of interest, education, background in substance use disorders.
Great, thank you, Pat. Melissa?
I want to +1 to the 5 years. I was concerned that 10 years was going to constrain us, so I just wanted to add that. I wonder if this is a space where we would say preference would be given to somebody who had that experience. I would just want to be thoughtful about the language that would not make it necessarily professional experience, but would acknowledge that someone with lived expertise could also be considered in the role. So just would want to be thoughtful about the way we craft that.
Great, thank you. It's a great suggestion. Bruce?
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I just wouldn't want it to exclude somebody, with the right qualifications for this position, not having experience with substance use disorder. And then also, I think it's one of the things with preference, but also, it could be bonus points for somebody during the interview process. But I wouldn't want to keep good candidates out just because they don't have experience with substance use. I mean, they may have had experiences in other fields that are somewhat related, and I just wouldn't want to exclude anybody.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Thank you, Bruce. Tess?
I think I would prefer candidates experience with substance use, largely because of the amount of communication they're going to be having with people that are applying for funding. And I think having a good understanding of, the difference between harm reduction, treatment, recovery, having some of that foundational knowledge will be an additive. And of course, I wouldn't want to exclude any candidates, but I could just see that being almost necessary for, like what Pat said, for there not to be a huge learning curve.
Great, thank you. Bruce? Oh. Thank you all for that feedback and input. I would definitely echo what folks have said, that I think this job is challenging no matter how you slice it, but having an understanding of recovery residences versus recovery centers, just as a simple example, is important and something that will allow you to do your job on a day-to-day basis easier and with far more experience and knowledge. And with all the work that we do in the realm of people and projects and pillars we work in, I think that understanding is pretty pivotal. Great. Okay, Elizabeth, we can add the suggestion here to change that to preferred or preference given experience to people with those experiences. And again, we'll workshop that language. Does the committee feel that we should do the same with the nonprofit or foundation management experience, or the preference or the language should just reflect how preference will be given to folks, with experience in the SUD, OUD field?
Personally, I like the added of the nonprofit or foundation management in there.
Any other thoughts? Okay. And if we're asking for 5+ years of management experience anyway, seems like that may be a no-brainer, but something that we can explicitly call out for sure. Okay, great. Any last comments, suggestions, thoughts on this ED job description? The last note I want to make, and we don't have to explicitly mention the salary range now, but with the job description that we've drafted, the salary range will be significantly higher than what we currently have budgeted for that. And so just something for us to consider and potentially start thinking about. And I think we can post this next week without having that salary range determined. But I do want to give the committee an opportunity to discuss that right now, provide any thoughts or feedback that may be top of mind for us to, again, just sort of have out there for future conversations. Or if there's any desired or expected salary ranges that folks have to offer, those would be welcomed. Melissa.
I will not be helpful with the salary range, but I just wanted to clarify how you outlined that, Mary. Are we suggesting that we might post it and then just while we're figuring out the salary, or we want to determine a range before we post it?
I think my thoughts right now are if we have a range that we want to recommend that we can bring to the full council meeting next week, that's great. If not, I certainly don't want to hold up posting this description just because of the salary range, that we can include language about how the salary will be commensurate with the experience of an individual. And so we can just kind of put that boilerplate language. It's certainly something that I think is helpful to have. I know when I applied, I looked at that. So this is also outside my realm of expertise for sure. So if anyone has any thoughts or suggestions, again, those would be welcomed, just even as a starting point.
Okay.
And thank you, Melissa.
I would suggest that we strongly think about this group making a recommendation to the council about the range and being able to post it with a range. I think that's really important to attract candidates and for transparency to have some sense of what we're offering. So I will give some more thought to that range, but I think it would be very helpful for this group to come to the full council with a proposal of that range that could be part of the posting.
Great. Agreed. Pat, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, just one thought that there's an executive committee meeting of the council, which is, I can't remember when. Is it? It's before the board meeting, right? No.
No, it's directly after. And unfortunately, I don't think we could allow the executive committee to make that change.
Yeah. The only thing I could say is the executive committee certainly, because the treasurer is part of that, could make a recommendation from that committee on salary.
I'd like to see us get some data. This is a unique job. So Mary, I don't know if there's your colleagues or there's, a way to look at, what's fair for this job, for this position. Is there any way that you could?
Yeah, Joe, I could ask certainly colleagues from other states. I will note that it's a little bit hard to draw a true comparison that might help us determine a starting point for the salary. And there's a number of reasons. The primary one being other folks I've spoken to from other states, they're employees, they're not contractors. And the way that their settlement funds are set up and their council works or whatever their equivalent is all quite different. So I can certainly ask. Again, I don't think it will provide us all the information we need, but certainly could be a starting point. And yeah, so I can look into that. Another thing to note, again, in addition to this being a contracted position, right now, I'm planning to post the position for 1 year unless this committee recommends otherwise. And I know for some folks that can take on a different level of risk and maybe the salary should reflect that risk. So just something for us to keep in mind as well.
Mary, there's also a salary range for Maine in the Maine nonprofit. Again, it'll be hard to match what we do, but they have a report they do periodically on Maine salaries and break them down into different organizations. It's a Maine nonprofit association.
Okay, we can look into that. Elizabeth, sorry to put you on the spot. When I know that you had looked at some other similar job descriptions and you'd sent those out to the council. Do you happen to recall if salary or compensation was included in those job descriptions?
Yeah, I think one of them it was like 200 to 300. I believe that was the West Virginia one. And then the other one, I have the notes pulled up. I think this one was 110, 225, but I don't know if it makes a difference. This is a Canadian company, so I don't know how much our foundation, so I don't know if that would impact it all that much. But and then I don't believe that the last one shared anything, but that was also a state line. So as you mentioned, would be a little bit different than a contracted position.
Okay, thank you.
So I think people, when we were talking about Mary, your compensation, I want the person not underpaid. So I really think it's important to arrive at a fair number.
Mm-hmm.
So anything I can do to help. I mean, and I mean, I get the contract thing, but it's most of us who work in the field know the cost of all the other the non-salary expenses, the percentage, and that varies from organization to organization. So anything, and I'm good, pal, if you want to, if you're, well, executive committee won't meet before, but I think to your point, Melissa, I think some groups should recommend, so we don't go round and round at the council meeting. And I think it's different. And I think Mary, the factor you said about the risk of it being 1 year. I also think the developmental phasing of this job, the development of the council really matters. So it may not seem like it's the same as my job today, but it's got different challenges than my job for an organization that's been around for 50 years. So I would want those factors all considered, or would
Yes.
hope we would consider those.
Great. Any other thoughts right now? I think, and this is more of a personal opinion and recommendation, maybe than professional, but I think we should look at probably 120 an hour as the minimum. We should double what we're doing now for sure, especially with the skill set that we're looking for, or somewhere around that. I think it needs for us to be competitive. And again, recognizing this is a contracted position, especially if the person has, you know, a higher degree above a bachelor's, something that we should incorporate and keep in mind. Yeah, Amber.
I guess I just have a question. So we're talking about doing this contract for 1 year, but we all have 2 year terms on the council. So why wouldn't we do a 2 year contract? Why would it just be for a year if we're gonna have to revisit in a year and may need this position extended anyway?
It's a great question. I'll answer to the extent I can, and then Pat, if you want to jump in. I believe the 1 year is so that the council and also the consultant have the ability to kind of test it out and see if it's working. It's fairly easy to extend the contract once it's in place. I mean, there is the provision in my contract and in Elizabeth's that if for any reason myself or the council feels like we're not doing our work or want to be doing our work, we have to give a 30-day notice. But in terms of the timeline of the council terms and the staffing terms, I think that's something we should definitely consider. Succession planning is not something we've touched at all, but making sure there's a good overlap in, again, the timelines of when we hire folks and when the council terms start and end, I think is important for us to keep in mind. We can certainly look at the 1 year contract if the council would like. I have no opposition to that. Pat.
I think the idea of the 1 year was because we were looking at, do we partner with somebody else? Don't we partner? And part of the new person's really job is to say, are we going to hire additional staff, do everything in-house, or are we going to allow the committee to be able to explore all of that without being tied to a 2 year contract? And I think that was the part. And Mary's contracts, for those who don't know, are 1 year. We've only hired Mary on 1 year contracts. And so that was sort of the premise, I believe, that we had with that
Just would the committee like to see the timeline of the contract changed at all? Or if we're comfortable moving forward with 1 year? Okay. Great. Amber, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'm sort of with you, Amber. I think a year flies by so quickly, but because of the nature of where we're at developmentally, it might make sense to just stick with a year. But down the road, it would be great to see it move to a 2 year.
I also think that there's value in having a 1 year contract because if it's renewed, we have the ability to amend the job description as well. So if the role changes or we feel like the person is doing work outside of what's currently, they're currently contracted to do, I think that's important. And as Joe's mentioned, as we learn more about who we are as a council, we'll want to have that flexibility. And the 1 year contract, I think, allows us to do that. Probably more easily than a longer term contract. Great. Thank you all for this valuable discussion. I feel like we have a great job description draft, which again, Elizabeth and I will work to finalize, and we'll send that out to the committee in advance of the full council meeting. But before we wrap up, does anyone have any additional thoughts, questions, concerns? Paul?
There was talk about whether or not we include a salary range, and I don't think that's been decided yet. I agree with you that we should start at about 120,000. Though I have no experience in this, so I'm just kind of ballparking it in my brain.
Pat?
Here's the negotiator in me. And again, it's a public meeting, so what difference does it make? I wouldn't go with your top salary. I'd have it a range. So we can go up to, depending on experience. But again, to double what we were paying is a huge leap financially. And make sure we're staying within, again, we're talking about hiring new staff and everything else, and we have to stay within our own budget. But again, I would be cautious about saying what the top salary would be, and I would look at up to that, depending on the candidate, the experience, and where you are. But be cautious of showing all the cards. But again, it's a public meeting, so the cards have been shown.
Yes.
Thanks, Mary. I apologize if this question has been answered today or at another meeting, but in any of the research on this role in similar types of organizations, have any salary ranges been identified that we can pull from or discuss as a potential range?
Yeah, so we touched on this a little bit, but there's yes, we have some suggested ranges, but it's hard again to find a comparable one with it being a contracted position and for a range of other reasons. I think generally what I've seen for these positions is around 150 to 200,000, sometimes more, again, depending on experience and many other factors. I think if we look at increasing the current salary range to something closer to that, that again, just from my perspective, not having much background with this, feels doable and like a fair starting point. Potentially a recommendation of up to 120 an hour, or 130 an hour to be again on the higher side, and we can provide that ceiling. that seems comparable with what I've researched and what I know. Again, just from doing this work and talking to folks.
Great. And the ones that you've looked at, did that include fringe benefits or any other types of benefits that, from what I understand, our contracts for salaries don't include things like, health insurance or anything like that. So is that factored into that range of 150 to 200?
Yeah, it is. And what I've seen more, again, and please speak up if anyone else has thoughts on this, more of like the 120 to 150 range with benefits. And so taking those out of, the picture and recognizing the taxes and all the other costs that one has to incur when they're a contractor. I think aiming for the 150 to 200 feels reasonable. Again, it's a shift from what we're doing, but hopefully will allow us to attract really qualified candidates. Paul?
And that, just to be clear, that's 150 to 200 per hour. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, no, wait, I'm sorry. That would be total.
Total. Go ahead, Melissa.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask that question, that I think that's your estimated salary based on that hour, right, Mary, or pay? We're using a few different numbers, and I'm with Paul that I want to make sure I understand which numbers we're talking about. The hourly rate, and then is there an estimated pay based on that?
I can Google it. The salary range that I have in my head, the total salary every year would be in the 150, 200, maybe 180 mark.
Okay.
And so hourly.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the numbers that we were batting around. And I think the other discussion has been whether Finance Committee should make the recommendation about the pay range or this committee. I still have a question about where we landed with that, but I feel strongly that it would be helpful to have some numbers attached to a job description that goes out. If we want to attract candidates that are serious, I think they're going to want to know what the range is or the ceiling is or some kind of numbers around that.
My quick Google search tells me that a salary of 200,000 a year is $96 an hour as the hourly wage. I do agree that the Finance Committee, or at least Ben, should weigh in on this. So if we can provide a recommendation, what I can do is bring that to him in advance of the full council meeting and then have him weigh in on that, and be able to do his own research. And that way we can have a final number ready for next week. Great. Liz?
I was just gonna say, I mean, we hire a lot of consultants and people who work in this, generally in this field, and our general pay, I'd say most people charge 125 an hour. But that's also people who are probably working for multiple organizations. So there's like the hustle factor that has to come into that. So if this is kind of guaranteed, at least 40 to 50 hours a week, I think doing it in that 96 to 110, like you're guaranteeing people a lot of hours.
Yes.
Whereas often consultants they're paying for all the other things that they have to do to get the jobs and all of that. So anyway, I'm just like agreeing we're in the right ballpark for what we've been paying people to.
Great, thank you for that. So perhaps we can move forward with a recommendation of up to $110 an hour. Would the committee be comfortable with that recommendation based on the discussions we've had so far?
I would be comfortable with that as long before it went to the full council that Ben was consulted as our treasurer.
Yes. Yep. We can certainly do that. Okay. We'll bring that to him. Wonderful. All right. Before we move on, any last thoughts, comments, suggestions on the ED position? All right. Thank you. And thank you, Elizabeth, for your help. All right. Joe, I believe we still have contract updates, and then future funding opportunities on the agenda to discuss. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. If you don't mind, I think what would be helpful is if I can have just a couple minutes to pull up some of the budgets, and make sure Elizabeth has those and my notes, that would be great. Are you okay if we move to the future funding conversation in the meantime?
Sure.
Okay, great.
So the bones are also tied together here. Um, last month, Mary, you and I kind of talked or emailed before about the conversation, and I kind of just moved forward with it without much notice. So I think it was a good, and thank everyone for jumping right in and having a conversation. I think where we landed is I think we want to, and I'm not suggesting we do this today because I think it's going to take some prep work with you, Mary, and Elizabeth around the school funding the 3%. And I think that's worthy of a conversation. And probably Pat, you have your hands around it well too, but we could put that on a future agenda. And it's I sent out last night kind of roughly the categories that we talked about. Um, so uh but where we really landed, I think, was two major things. One is that we really want to hear from Ben on the finance committee regularly to know where we stand to even guide that conversation. So I will reach out to Ben, and it can be on the finance committee agenda, the cadence to which this group or the full council really knows what we have to work with. The second, I think, takeaway was that I think there was the will of the group was maybe to do more strategic planning, doing this work in the context of strategic planning, so that we could, you know, I know Mary and now you have Elizabeth, like sort of a gap analysis. We have a lot of information, having that kind of popcorn conversation like we had 2 weeks ago again, doing that with the board, and then really trying to develop all that around the strategic plan. One of the things that I hope is in our future and our destiny is that this group, the contract work has really landed here. And I think it takes away from sort of the creativity around conversations about other funding ideas. So I really hope as we develop and mature that the work of contracts that many people have sort of worked on lands with more staff or more being outsourced more so that this group really has the time to dig in meeting by meeting around kind of key needs, ideas around future programming ideas. So that's sort of, I think, all I'd want to say today, unless we'll have other things to add from last meeting's conversation. But I think, Mary, we can talk and the council can talk too about sort of how we do that. And how that plays out throughout the next year. But I'd open the floor to any member of the committee to talk. Did I miss anything from the last meeting?
Joe, I thought it was an interesting piece. And for me, and again, I'm only one person on the council, the development of what we're going to do and moving forward with the schools really needs to, I think, get some real planning around how we're going to do that according to the MOU and all the other things that are in there. And the other thing is when you look at the list, the thing that we always have to keep in mind is that we don't have easy access to our funds.
Yeah.
So it's always looking at it like, one of the things that's great in there is like giving families money, which is a great idea, but we don't have that kind of access. And if we want to do that, then maybe we need to look at how we do change things so we can. But the list was it was a great list to look at. But for me, in my head, the school funding really needs to be a priority with us as to how we're going to go through it. And I look forward to conversations about planning at that.
And to do that, Pat, you and I and others will probably have to have a pre-meeting to plan that because it's a little bit, it's going to take some figuring out. One of the things I thought that we might want to talk about briefly today when Liz and Melissa is around kind of What do you all need from this group around the prevention work that you did? Is there anything you guys need from this group around that wonderful document and next steps?
I mean, I guess I would say, Melissa, maybe you have some thoughts. I would say that, HRA was kind of asking for a timeline, like what do we think a timeline might be? Because they have to plan for staffing. And so they just reached out about that. The timeline I gave them was, we shall see. We're doing other things right now, and then it might take a little while to get a contract with them. So I think I'm not sure if that's in this group or not, but having a timeline, I think there's some conversations, it's like the details need to be worked out. Like with Maine CDC, for the 18 to 25-year-old. So I guess I don't know, Joe, what needs to happen in this group. I think it's like we just need to chip away at the details of contract with HRA, and then we need to develop an RFP process for the 2 gen work. So I don't know if we want to wait to have HRA be developing an RFP process for the other path, and we sort of mirror that for the 2 gen and just change some of the language around what the actual ask is. So it's really contracts with Maine CDC and HRA that need to happen first, it seems, in my mind. Melissa, do you have things to add or?
No, I think you're thinking through what I've been trying to think through too, Liz, like what's the order of events is I think where we're at. And I think the more that we're able to forecast, I know there's an order of events that's part of a larger order of events of contracting. So that the to the extent that we can forecast a little bit the contracting process and give people a sense of when they can expect to have further conversation. Again, I'm not sure if that's this committee or the full council, but I think that would be helpful to us as folks are going to start becoming more aware and asking questions about timing for that.
Chastity.
I don't even really know if this is related, but with all of the cuts, I know CDC has some cuts. I assume these are different parts of CDC, but is there anything that's going to be affected there? Like, do we need to talk to them to see if this is still going to be a possibility? And then over on the school stuff, we should look at inviting DOE or whoever to hear their needs in all of this too.
I will say I can't speak for them, but what I know of this moment, which could change in, tomorrow, is that the funding cuts that went to substance use prevention through Maine CDC are ARPA, like specific ARPA dollars. It's called ARPA Block Grant, and it's money that was set to end in June of this year. They may indeed get further cuts to the to their budget from SAMHSA and substance use prevention money. But the current ones that just happened is this kind of a small subset for their substance use prevention. They got other cuts but I don't think this should impact the um, the the current funds don't seem to be impacting their ability to hire another person or contract out a person to do this 18 to 25-year-old. But we can certainly ask them. I have a meeting with Megan, who runs the substance use prevention, next week. So I can ask her about that and like what I do foresee more prevention cuts. Like it just seems like it's all coming. So obviously I don't know as much as the next person, but it appears that there's just a cutting of all of the SAMHSA, a bunch of the SAMHSA dollars.
Thanks, Liz. Pat.
So just so Chastity and others know, one of the things in the MOU in there is that we have to consult with a content expert in regards to special ed. So that's already built in on the requirement of that funding that the council either hire or somehow partner with a content expert. So they have to be part of it. And I do know at last count, I think it was 40 positions that were eliminated out of the CDC. Again, mostly was federal dollars. So I don't know how they'll reorg or what they're going to do. But that's the last that I heard in regards to that. But we have to consult with a content expert, which I think is the right thing to do. Anyways, to have someone either on the committee or working with us.
Thank you, Pat. So back to Liz, your point, and Mary. So is this a capacity issue now to sort of move those contracts along, or are we kind of now it's all kind of in the queue? Or is there decision point, Liz? I'm sorry if I've lost that information.
A couple things. One, I want to just go back quickly to what Pat mentioned before it slips my mind. The way the MOU is written is that it's actually the school divisions, and that's not the right word, but they're the ones who have to appoint the special education expert. And I have asked Brendan if he can provide me a list or an email to address of their lawyer so we can get that process started and let them know we're interested. So that will be the first thing we do. We need to get their buy-in. And then once we have conversations with them, my recommendation is we create another subcommittee to do that work specifically, and that we structure it similar to how the prevention work group structured their work. I thought that was wonderful. And again, they will have to drive the initial steps, but we're working to get their contact information and get that set up. And so what we can start talking about with the committee or the full council is who may be interested in participating in those meetings or being part of that subcommittee. But right now we're sort of waiting on that information and for them to make that appointment. I do want to say that what we will need to do sooner rather than later, once again the process is initiated, is make sure we contract with whoever they identify as the special education consultant. It's not explicit in the MOU, but Brendan's interpretation, which I completely agree with, is that the council would be responsible for paying that person to provide their time and expertise. So we'll just want to make sure that we keep that on our radar when we're ready. And in terms of the timeline, Joe, I really do think it's a capacity issue right now. I did speak with folks at DO or at CDC about the timing of the contract, which I do think we might be able to do through an MOU, which would be fantastic and save us a little bit of work. That would be sometime mid-fall, but that it was not likely we could get it finished before then, knowing that we have, again, 48 grant contracts and staffing and a lot of transitions upcoming. So that's the general time frame that I'm anticipating right now, and that we may want to communicate to the health resources folks. Again, unless something changes, I just don't know how we're going to get that done sooner right now.
So you're saying fall. I mean, I just think they need to know. It's more like a need to know than it is a say something that's unrealistic. I think fall's fine if we just let them know that so then they can plan accordingly.
Yeah.
Obviously, we'd all love to start getting this stuff done sooner, but if we are saying fall is when they could feasibly have a contract, then they can kind of plan out, okay, how long will it take them to build the RFP, to provide the technical support for folks who want to apply for an RFP. So we're talking that money would go out, if you do an RFP, we're talking about this time next year.
Yeah. And I also want to caveat that by saying, I won't be here. And so the new ED would be the one overseeing that, and that timeline might change. If any council members are interested in drafting contracts and want to help get that rolling, you're more than welcome. But I think from a staffing and capacity standpoint, it's, through July we'll be working on grant contracts, and that's hopeful in some ways just to get all those finalized. And with this being a new process, you know, it'll just take time to work through the details of it.
Yeah, I think that's really hard to hear, Mary. Like, I
Yeah.
think, you know,
Yeah.
with all the respect, I mean, you guys are working as hard, but I think that's like that'll mean the prevention work will be 3 years into the council before anything happens. So I just, again, maybe Pat, this is a capacity conversation that needs to go back to the full council, but like that will be like what year are we in? That will be like 3.5. Like this group will almost be done our terms. Again, I'm saying this funny because it's a funny thing, but I think that's so Pat, if we might just want to think about how we take that back, not to step on your toes, but it's a capacity issue. There's not enough. We can't move any faster.
Correct. And the grant committee can bring that to the table by saying that they want a discussion that it's a capacity issue that the grants won't be able to
Mhm.
get out until fall. But again, it's not just our capacity issue. It's also partly the issue of the state and the
Mhm.
requirements that we had to move forward. Like, I can tell you right now, if we did all of them today and got them to the state, they can't turn them around either. So it's not just the capacity of the
Mhm.
council, it's also the state office can only handle so many of our contracts at a time. They don't have the capacity either to do it. So
Mhm.
it's a twofold. We can vamp up all we want, but the larger conversation is if we vamp up, can the state take hold of that and get them out as fast as we can get them to them? Mary's worked very hard at coordinating work so that on both ends, on our end, we're doing it as fast as we can. They're doing it, but they also have whatever you want to call them, the hoops or the whatever that they have to jump through. That again, we could give them 48 contracts today, but they don't have the capacity to get them out either.
Mhm.
So I think it's a conversation that needs to happen at a full council meeting about how, what, and where we can do that. But again, it's not just us. It's also on the state end.
Okay.
Yeah. And I trust me, I wish there was a way we could move faster. Elizabeth is 3 weeks in, and both of us are doing contracting for the first time and dedicating all we can to it. And yeah, we can only do so much. And I do think again, contracting in particular, even with Barry Dunn support, it all has to funnel
Mhm.
through me and through the state. And that is a bottleneck no matter how you slice it. And I know we've had this conversation before, but the reality is we're stuck within the constraints of what 1.5 people, 2 people can do. And transitioning away from relying so heavily on the state would allow us to at least have full control over processes. But I know we've talked about that, and it would require a lot of changes that we're probably not ready to undertake. But longer term, I think we're going to keep running into this issue if we can't address sort of these issues at their core. So
While we're talking about capacity, I mean, one of the observations that I have, even in the sort of review scoring process, if we were the Maine Community Foundation, there's like people. Like the fact that we talked about the recovery school, and Paul, you may have been the only one who's like I didn't see it. So I think even as we think of that as a model, I don't think it's the right, it's again, we're using the resources we have, but I think that we're trying to have an informed conversation about a really important project when many of us had not read the proposal. So I think, if we can chip away at this capacity conversation, and then Rome wasn't built in a day, But I think a lot of it, when the, sort of, it all gets built sort of on a rocky foundation because we're trying to do the best we can do with our capacity. So not to add insult to injury, and we're all working, we're pedaling as fast as we can. Um, so we will keep the conversation going, and we can talk about it at the council meeting. And
Yes. And again, especially with like the prevention work, for instance, giving that sort of rough timeline, that process could go a little bit quicker, planning ahead sooner rather than later and starting to gather those materials and have those discussions. And if any council members, I know Liz and Melissa they've been working with me on a couple of contracts. But if anyone is interested in engaging in those conversations and helping move them forward, I think that right now is the only way we could do things any faster. Is like Pat said, if we just had everything ready, at least it's not just our timeline, but we're definitely all hands on deck right now with contracts. And that's still slow moving. So any support in that realm again is always welcome, but I recognize it's a lot. It will always be a lot, but it's part of our work.
Yeah, Mary, I appreciate that. And I appreciate Joe, you naming like it's painful to hear that, but also just totally respect and appreciate that you guys are working as hard and fast as you can on these really complex things. I don't want to speak for Liz, but I'm happy to chat a little bit about whether or not we may have any capacity to. What I'm concerned mostly about is while you're here, Mary, we at least have like gears in motion. I worry about the gap of like,
Yeah.
even if we had things in the queue and we were waiting for the state to get it back through their funnel, I could see a real benefit to trying to push and think about, capacity beyond you and Elizabeth to help with those, with HRIA and the CDC contract, right? To get so that there's not, I'm just concerned about a gap of when you go and the new ED comes on, the lag to get that back up and moving.
And
Yeah,
I do think that we
coordinating
could
that.
help support like a draft. I mean, they're like a consultant, the
Yeah.
HRA in many ways, that I wonder if the Barry Dunn contract and another contract that looks like it could be altered with their scope of work that they've really scoped out quite well, that we could, that maybe it's not as big of a lift so that we could have that done. You could look through it and know, and we could feel good about it, even if it doesn't go in the queue till later. At least it's like in process, like Melissa's saying.
Yeah, and that's a great suggestion. I am more than happy to provide you the Word document of Barry Dunn's, which would be a great starting point, and then you could adapt that. And again, if it's ready, we'll keep setting it through. Just out of fairness for the grantees and others, I'm trying to not, change my mental plan and again to draft to the best we can. But that contract in particular is an easier lift in some ways because we do have a template that we can pull from, and they've already provided you the deliverables and the scope of work that as long as it's in contract language and we could send that to Barry Dunn to review, we can move that ahead sooner. If that's something you're willing to help with, that I'm happy to facilitate the process on our end and just get it in the queue, as you said. And I do want to recognize, Melissa, what you said, that I haven't really named this, but I do have concerns about the workflow when I leave that, as all of you can appreciate, onboarding and starting a new position is really difficult, as Elizabeth is experiencing now in real time. And my goal is to finish the work we've done to the extent I can before I go. And that's going to take all my effort and time between now and the end of June. So again, if we can support development and drafting help, then that's really great because again, with staffing gaps on the AG side and then also on our side, we just may need some time to kind of get our feet under us again. So, great. Thank you. Joe, if it's okay, I want to share a couple budgets that I want the committee to review before I bring them to the full council. Something that I've learned is for any of the grant applications that we reduce their funding award for, we have to request an updated budget to reflect the proper grant amount. But the full council does need to vote on that in order for us to incorporate it into the contract. So my hope now is to provide you all a quick walkthrough of those, at least some of them. I haven't gotten through all of them yet. But that way, if there's any questions or concerns, we can at least talk about that in committee and then bring, again, any recommendations or thoughts to the full council before an official vote is made. So I'm going to pull those up. This first one is for Lake Region Recovery Center. And this is just a quick walkthrough of this. So I want to note that we cut their budget to, or excuse me, we reduced their funding award to $775,000. The original request amount was 150, and the project that we cut was primarily around outreach in the schools. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, we saw that as prevention work and not recovery support. And this was part of the last package of applications that we passed. And so what they've done is they've changed their personnel and the supplies they need and equipment to match that. I believe primarily this was just taking away a staff position that was supporting, again, that more outreach focused work. But I wanted you all to review this and have a chance to look over it. And Elizabeth had sent these along to you all as well. And as you'll see, this reflects the 75,000. Any questions, comments, concerns? Great. Again, that was for Lake Region, and we will vote on that officially next week. This next one I'm sharing, this is for, so we have two of them actually, for Access Direct. They are providing transportation services to folks throughout sort of the treatment world, and also providing some funding for folks based on where they are in their recovery journey. The biggest change here, I believe, is that they were trying, initially they had requested, I believe, $1 million, and we reduced the funding to 500,000 for 2 years. And so what this grant budget reflects is the placement value of helping people again get into detox, residential treatment. They took out recovery resident support, so they're not using our funding for the first 2 to 4 weeks of rent. Those are the primary changes. Again, it's just really the placement volume number here that we saw the biggest change. They're also leasing a facility to do their work out of and engaging with more volunteers. So we're also supporting transportation expenses for those folks. And the year 2 budget looks very similar. Pat.
Is this the one there was a third year attached to it?
Yeah, I looked it up, and I think what they had done is just added an extra tab incorrectly. They sent me 2 spreadsheets. Yeah, I was just reviewing their emails. They sent me a 2025 and a 2026.
Oh, okay. So it was for 2 years, not for 3.
Yes, it's for 2 years. They're all, yeah, maximum of 2 years for funding for all of our awards. There are some instances where, there are grantees who need a longer period of time in which to use the funds. And in those cases, I've worked with them to do like a 3-year contract period, but still the same 2 payments. That's the only time where we may see a 3-year contract. The payment stays the same. That just allows us to require reporting for them to see how the funds are being used over a longer period of time. Let's see the other. Great, and here's their 2026 budget, the year 2. Great. And so say they didn't have all the call centers or upfront costs, but they have your utilities, and we're looking at a similar volume of placements for this as well. Any questions, comments, concerns about the updated budget? Great. Okay. The last one I have to share right now. I had spoken, this is for the Lifeline Addiction and Recovery Services, which is the project that Miles was awarded funding for. I want to note that I had conversations with him about the changes because our funding was reduced to the 500,000 from the 750,000 that was requested. This budget does not reflect the changes fully. So I'll have to go back to him to make sure I actually have a copy of it. But I'll share the budget with you and we can just walk through that a bit so we have an idea of what's coming next week. Oh. Great. So from my discussions with Miles, the primary change is that the funding is now almost solely being used to help with startup costs with the facility expenses. I know he's already begun some work on this. From my understanding, the change in this budget will really be reflected in the personnel. Again, knowing that with the amount that we've awarded, additional funding will be needed from other sources to help with all the staffing costs, which are themselves at 500,000. So that updated budget I'll make sure to have for next week. But I just wanted to call that to everyone's attention.
So the budget that we will see from this is mostly bricks and mortar that the funding is going to, versus this one here includes staffing and startup cost. But Miles will be submitting something that talks about actually getting the facility ready to get the licenses needed to be operational.
Yes, yep, and it will reflect the total award amount, which again, from my conversations and understanding, the updated budget will not include the same personnel costs, but will still include the facility expenses, which obviously you need to have a certified and running facility to have staff.
Thank you.
Yes. Great. Any other questions, thoughts? Great. Again, I'll bring those to the full council for a official vote. But based on, again, my understanding of what needs to happen, I'll try to bring any updated budgets to this committee first, and that way we can have a discussion before the full council takes a vote. Great. The other thing that I want to mention to the committee, we don't need to have a vote on this, but something that I've noticed in my conversations with our grantees is that for some folks, based on their total award amount, they're subject to certain audit provisions in their contract that some of them have quite a hefty price tag, and changing the award amount only to reduce it, not to increase it, would allow them to fall into sort of lesser audit categories. That's a very inarticulate way to say that, but essentially it would lessen their audit requirements, and the cost that the provider would incur to fulfill that obligation would be less. And I have had one, and I think potentially two grantees request a reduced funding award amount by $1 to $5 to help them with the requirements. Now that they have the full contract, obviously those are becoming a reality very quickly, and especially for folks who have not had state contracts in the past. So I wanted to mention that as something that I've spoken about with grantees, and that I want to bring to this committee to make sure if there's any strong feelings or thoughts about not doing that we're doing it one way or another, that we have that discussion. And that way, if needed, we can bring it up for a full council vote. If any funding changes were made, that would require a full council vote, but that's a big change that I wouldn't want to discuss further with grantees if the committee was not in favor of doing that. And again, I'm not at this point ready to provide names of providers who've requested that, but it's typically for grant awards of 500,000 or more. They fall into sort of a greater audit requirement with a higher price tag, and reducing the award just below that 500,000, again, a $5 to $10 deduction even, would lessen the burden on them and the costs they would incur. So I'd love to hear if anyone has, again, any thoughts about that. Pat?
So Mary knows my thoughts on it. I understand it. Especially for a small agency, for a startup, a full audit is very expensive. But most state contracts, again, if you're over a certain amount, requires it. I do think, we have to be cautious about agencies need to be audited and financials need to be looked at, and we need to be able to ensure that our funds are going and are being spent where they say they're being spent. And certainly it's okay, to reduce an amount by a little bit in order to avoid it. But if an agency has other state contracts, they're already doing it anyways, or required to do it anyways. And again, my caution only is that it is, for me as a council member, it's important that agencies are audited in some way or another, whether it's a financial full audit or whether it's a smaller financial piece. But we have to keep in mind that our funds need to be spent where they say they're going to be spent. But again, I understand smaller agencies, but most agencies with a contract from the state have to abide by those guidelines. So we're not asking something that some of the agencies aren't familiar with.
There
Yeah,
probably
Pat, that's
is,
a great point.
there probably is a financial threshold though, right, Pat? For a really small, but it's probably,
And that's why I feel bad for the smaller agencies. But
yeah,
for other agencies, some of the other ones, they do it anyway. So it's in their budget
yeah.
because they don't do particular programs. They do a whole agency, like your agency does a whole agency. They don't pick apart ones. So again, it's for those smaller agencies that I feel bad for because they don't have any other requirement to do it. But again, we have to be good stewards of our funding and to ensure that it goes where it's supposed to go.
And I will note that the audit language is universal for us. So all of our grantees are subject to some level of audit. It's just the degree to which they may be required to go through that process. And again, the level of detail and the amount of dollars they would have to spend. So that is standard. It's just, what bracket they fall in. And understandably, I see how reducing the funding by a small amount could ultimately save them a couple thousand in the long run, especially for newer organizations.
More than a couple.
Yes.
It's expensive.
So does anyone have any objections to the potential reduction of grant awards if requested by grantees?
Well, I guess I guess there's this, I don't know, there's like a tricky line here, right? Where
Yes.
of course we don't want this to be something that's like really difficult for somebody, but also like new organizations have like we need to make sure that they're financially, like if we're giving somebody $500,000, and the point is that at $500,000, then you need an audit to make sure that you're being a good steward of that money. And then we change it to 490,000. I guess maybe I do. I don't know. It doesn't sit right in my gut of like, we're allowing an organization who maybe has never held this much money before. That's a lot of money. And so if we're letting them out from under a audit that everybody else has to do at 500,000, yeah, I guess I'm slightly uncomfortable with that. And I want to be fair to those who are struggling with trying to figure out how to do this for the first time. But I also know I've been around long enough that I've seen organizations who go from having a budget of, 50,000 to then having a budget of 750,000 really quickly. And I want to make sure somebody's supporting them or at least watching what's happening. It's a big jump for some organizations. I don't know. Are other people slightly uncomfortable? Or is this just me?
No, Liz,
Mhm.
I'm with you 100%. For me, again, it's a lot of money on it's a huge risk. And I hear you in that uncomfortableness. Absolutely, I'm behind you.
So Chastity, I just saw your question in the chat about a state audit versus a
Yeah, is that what
federal.
these are? Like
Well,
people are already gonna
TOA
have to
is
do the
large, so
state audit?
we have to do a single audit, which is required by the federal government, and the threshold is 750,000 and above. But basically, every nonprofit has to produce a 990. It's like your tax return. So in ways, that is your audit. So I don't know all the ins and outs because I only really know the single audit, and it's very expensive to Pat's. We spend a lot of money. But Liz, I'm with you. I think we really need to talk about that and figure out, we can't fund something that can't comply with all of those requirements.
Right.
Um,
And so like if it's okay, we want a $250,000 one versus 500,000, then that's different. Like you're substantially changing the amount, and therefore then maybe if the audit's not needed for something like that, that's fine. But like just getting under like feels, I don't know. Paul has his hand up. He has thoughts.
Go ahead, Paul.
I'm agreeing with Joe and Liz, and what I think we could do is place a threshold that if we were going to decrease the grant amount to avoid an audit, we would want to reduce it by a certain amount, maybe like 25% or something like that,
Hmm.
so that we could be sure that we're not doing it just to get get through the rules that exist.
And Mary, since you're working with Barry Dunn, and I know we're not working in their audit division, but they're our TOA's auditor, if they could direct you, like they could probably give you, some really important information, even if we had to pay, and I could beg Sarah Beliveau, the president, because I've known her for 25 years. But I think we need that kind of guidance from a public auditing firm, so that we know, because I mean, we all have our different realities in terms of the size of our organization. So, because to your point, Paul, yes, like dancing around the number, we don't want to be part of that. We don't want to collude in, oh, let's give them $5 instead of 750 to avoid this or that. So I think if we and I could we can talk offline. I don't also mind reaching out to Sarah at Barry Down to see if, but you have it in with your people. Maybe they could just give you a sheet with all the requirements.
I think I could ask for that. I think I could be successful. I just pulled up a contract that they reviewed yesterday, and they have a comment about the audit requirement, which I asked them not to look at, and they provided advice and guidance on it already. So I can certainly ask them for support. Thank you for this conversation. This is helpful for me to listen to and to hear you all discuss. I share the concerns that you've all mentioned. I think it's a slippery slope for us to reduce funding by a small amount to avoid certain requirements that are really standard for the state. And if we're trying to support, especially new organizations, in being sustainable and successful beyond our funding, we need to make sure that our requirements are aligned with what they'll be expected to do moving forward. And I have concerns again that if we do this for one grantee, we would have to do it for multiple. And again, from a workload and negotiation standpoint, it's a lot, and probably not fair to us nor the provider ultimately. I will say, so Joe, as I mentioned, I'll speak with Barry Dunn about general audit requirements. Our
Mhm.
standard language includes, I believe, the same audit requirements that DHHS
Mhm.
has. Um, what I would recommend is we move forward with the audit language as is. And
Mhm.
then if we want to make sort of a wholesale change to our audit requirements, we can make amendments to contracts and do that in the future. But I think this is an important discussion for us to continue having.
Okay.
And certainly will take longer than just 1 or 2 meetings
Right.
for us to have. But again, goes to sort of the oversight and monitoring of the council and what rules we're going to enforce and how standardized we want those to be.
Mhm. Thank you.
Um, Joe, I believe that's all on my end for right now. Also, I want to say, Margot Walsh, I see your hand and I saw your email and I will respond to you with your question. We can't promote you or let you speak, unfortunately, but I will email you.
Is there any other business for the committee?
I would
No.
just offer a reflection as a newcomer to this work that at every turn it's more complicated than we think it will be.
Yeah.
Just something I'm reflecting on a lot lately.
That's the nature of the council.
It's a learning curve like this. There's no,
Yeah.
it doesn't curve.
Well, I'm just sitting here
There's no
thinking how
impact.
exhausting it's so exhausting, and it's so we just really want to do good with the money, and it's just exhausting. So, but we just persevere, keep moving, keep getting her done. But yes, you're right, Melissa.
Joe, can I quickly mention that on the agenda for next week or next committee meeting, we have reporting requirements to discuss. So I want to give a brief overview now so you all know sort of what to expect. So far, we have written our contracts to essentially just adopt the standard state reporting templates for that project or a similar project. But after my time in North Carolina and after speaking to other administrators, it was really clear to me that in addition to whatever reporting metrics and performance measures we want to look at, we also need to look at how the project aligns with the approved uses and make sure we're tracking that each and every quarter. So there's some standardized language and recommendations that have come out of North Carolina about how to do that. And we are incorporating language into the contract now that essentially says by June, we'll have the reporting template developed because our contract allows us to provide a template at any point. So that's something I'll engage Barry Dunn around and have them involved in the discussion or at least the development. But I do plan to talk to you all about that at our next meeting so that we can talk about what's required and again, start to get into that oversight and monitoring.
That's great.
So if anyone also in the meantime has any suggestions or examples of best practices, please feel free to send those my way. Or examples of templates that you found or others have found to be approachable and easy to understand. My goal is to ensure that it's simplified to the extent it can be, but also that we capture all the information. And as part of that, we'll also need to discuss who on the council and which committees are actually reviewing those reports, or if that's something the staff will continue to do. I've done that for RWI thus far, but we have SSP reports that are coming. And that would be a discussion we need to have around what the council is looking for or how, again, overview or oversight wants to be handled.
Well, that's sort of a particular skill set, so maybe we should ask for volunteers and not be at this committee. Only if you say so, Mary, but it's a lot.
Yeah,
What's his point?
yes,
Who
it is.
likes report reviewing? It's so fun.
We may also, again, just thinking ahead, we may need to think about like technical assistance in the future. For RWI, for instance, there was a lot of handholding, which was great at the beginning of walking them through and meeting with them about how to do that reporting. So again, while we're in this sort of in between and trying to fill in gaps, if any council members would be interested in helping to support that. Again, Elizabeth and I will try to handle it to the extent we can, but depending on the requests for that kind of help, we might need to look at getting someone on board, or adding that to Barry Dunn's scope of work. So just something to keep in mind.
Okay, well, we're down to the wire and we will meet again. Oh, Chastity, go ahead.
Sorry, it's back to the reporting stuff for a second.
You love reporting. Go for it.
Well, I'm assuming with the annual reports that have to go to your stuff, we'll also be putting together some report with all of the data we get from people's reporting.
Wait, can you say that again, Chastity? Sorry, you kind of broke up.
Sorry. With the annual report the AG's office and Pat usually does to the legislature, I'm assuming we also will have to do like another report that puts in all of this reporting stuff from everyone we funded too, right?
So we will have to provide some information for that annual report that the AG's office has to provide around the Maine Recovery Fund in general. We will have to roll everything up to a dashboard eventually, which is another entire process for us. But we will need to have all of our information publicly available. Yeah, and again, when I was in North Carolina, there were some really great examples of ways to make the collection of reports easier on the grantees and help to standardize and streamline that process and also make everything publicly available on one website. So I have ideas about that. Not I don't have the skills to actually develop a website for that. But something that we, again, will need to consider in the coming months. But I have an idea of how we should do that. But we don't, I'm fairly certain, and I can double check with Brendan, that we wouldn't have to have any sort of public facing reporting dashboard or the like completed necessarily by the time that report is due. Up until now, at least, I've just provided Brendan information for that, but I haven't had to draft it or participate too heavily in that.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, anything else before we have 5 minutes before we can end? Or we can end early, I should say. So our next meeting is on the 15th of April, so 14 days from today, and then we'll have a little bit of a 3-week break. So yay. Not that we don't love to see one another. So we will see you all on the 14th.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks,
See you all.
everyone.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Enjoy the sun.
Yes, bye-bye.